Welcome back again. This is Hector Vladimir. Today I'm going to continue with this recording for methods and technologies to live off the grid.
I would like to start with my attitudes and recommendations about what I call forcible electric connections, especially since on the last episode I discussed energy but missed mentioning these.
You do not have to have an electric connection. You do not need electricity to live. That is just a basic fact. You do not need to be connected to an electric company. That is just a human and civil right that you have. You cannot be forced to pay for a service, especially if you can provide that service on your own safely and reliably. As I've shown, that is a very easy thing to do, relatively easy. Just takes a few hundred watts to maintain the comfort and health and happiness of a person. You do not, again, have to pay for electricity. There are laws and regulations that imply that you have to keep your electric connection, but this is not true. That is just what they would like you to believe, so they imply it without really pushing the issue much, pushing the subject. They don't really say it directly because it is just logical that you cannot be forced to pay. I mean, that is the most despotic thing I can think of. One of them, you being forced to put your hand in your pocket and hand out money to a private for-profit company, such as the electric company. Think about it for 2 minutes and you have to come to the conclusion that that is just unreasonable, and it is by all kinds of logic and reasonable expectations. It should not be the case. It should not be illegal not to pay for a service. So you have all the right not to pay for electric energy. If you don't want to go through the trouble of taking that to court because you're renting a place or because your city or town is just belligerent with you and wants to go out of their way to make your life miserable just because you don't want to be connected, then you can just keep a connection, right? Keep a electric connection and just not use it. Just don't use the power. Keep that connection and just pay for whatever fee. And this is just a choice. This is something that a lot choose to do just to avoid the aggravation. But it is an option, and I'm offering that option for those people that just don't want to go through the heartache of fighting their AHJ, their town, whatever it may be, for whatever reason. And you may keep your connection and pay just the minimum fee. I think most electric companies have a minimum usage fee, and it could be as low as $20, $30, $40, perhaps a bit more in many areas. But I don't believe they're usually more than that. If you have zero usage as far as your kilowatts, they're just charging you for your connection or minimum rates, whatever that rate may be. Sometimes they do it by the day like they do here. I believe here is a little less than 50 cents per day. So it would come out to about, let's say, in a 30-day month, about $15, plus whatever other small fees and charges they want to throw in there, taxes and other fees that they like to throw in there. And I want to pick up with generators. I have developed the types of generators in the past. Here I'm going to just touch on a few types of generators. I believe there's only about 2 that I would recommend using to be off the grid, and I don't recommend the use to completely be off the grid with a generator only. A generator would have to be nothing but a backup power source. To have that as a primary power source or only power source, it would be prohibitively expensive, and it would be also polluting, noisy. It would require a lot of maintenance and cost for that maintenance. It's just not worth it. You would have to be dealing with gasoline and diesel or other fossil fuel types of fuels such as gas and propane. There are some generators that operate on natural gas, but those are quite less accessible, more expensive. So I'll focus on the ones that are more accessible, but I want to primarily focus on the propane gas generators, which are, I believe, a bit less costly than operating a gasoline generator. Also, I believe they are quieter. Comparatively, of course, they're not quiet, but they are quieter, and they perhaps may be just a bit more environmentally friendly than gasoline generators. Gasoline prices fluctuate quite dramatically sometimes depending on the area where you live, and that is another reason why you may want to go with liquid propane generators. So be cognizant of all these factors, and perhaps you may come to the same conclusion, use propane generators instead of gasoline. Yes, you may also choose diesel. Diesel is probably just as polluting as gasoline. They are likely louder, larger generators. I believe they are much more expensive as well. So I won't go into details of those. Of course, generator use, the way I recommend it to live off the grid is basically have them as a backup to use when all else fails and you absolutely electric power. Of course, you will be disconnected from utility grid power. So sometimes, perhaps rarely, you will need extra charge. For example, those days, weeks, consecutive days with very little or no sunlight. You may live in an area that doesn't have as much sun as you would like, or as much sun as it would be optimal for solar energy, or a place that doesn't have enough wind to keep your wind turbine turning and charging batteries as much as you would like. So you would need to have some sort of backup, because you will eventually want or even need that electric power, which a generator can provide whenever you need it. It could be day or night, it could be windy or not windy. Of course, there are precautions to take with generators. They do pollute, and not only that, but they also give away exhaust. They exhaust deadly fumes, and keep those outdoors when running. Of course, you may bring them in when not running, cover them, protect them from the elements, because they will get damaged, decay, they will go bad and cease to run if you leave them out in the elements. The rain, the sun, all of the humidity, all of the heat, the cold, that stuff's just going to break down the components, especially the seals. It can even affect metal parts, etc. So generators, of course, they have many varieties, types, manufacturers, sizes. The sizes for generators, which are basically engines, internal combustion engines for the most part, that turn a generator, basically an electrical generator, which is the opposite of a motor. A generator takes mechanical force in the form of spinning from an engine, and then that is transformed into electrical charge via an array of magnets, whether they be permanent magnets or electromagnets. So it has a part that has a generator, which is an electrical component. And you can plug in various items to it. Of course, you may directly wire it to your electrical panel, or you may just use it as they usually come, which they have electrical outlets. Some have electrical outlets for several types of outlets. But here in North America, they have the common outlets with 3 slots, and some generators may also output 220 volt AC, which is also called 240 volt AC, and those usually use a different outlet, usually a locking outlet for a locking plug with a circular connection. Sometimes it is a circular connection outlet. Those generators tend to be larger. Generator sizes vary by watts. They measure them by electrical output, which is watts, a combination of voltage and amperage. As far as the maximum amount of watts that it can provide without tripping or without stopping. And they can vary from, I've seen them as small as 700 watts. I had one myself with a very small engine and generator, and they go up in watts from there. 1,000, 1,200, 1,800, 2,000 watts, etc. You can go as large almost as you can afford with the generator. They have huge generators that are commercial, even utility grade, and I won't touch on those much because those are just outside of most people's ability to afford. The LPG generator of about, let's say, 2,000 watts is about as big as I would recommend for most applications. 2,000 watts, I believe, to be adequate. You can go a bit more, of course, 3,000, 3,500, 4,000 watts if you would like. But I find that not necessary. 2,000 watts is just enough for most applications I can think of. For residential use, you can run machinery, you can run heavy-duty equipment, vacuum cleaners, heavy-duty cleaning equipment such as rug vacuum cleaners and others, and maintenance equipment, leaf blowers, shop machinery such as circular saws. You can run drills, you can run all kinds of plug-in equipment. Of course, you can also run refrigerators, TVs, microwaves. You can run washing machines. The heat-producing appliances from a home, the ones that produce heat to work, such as clothes dryers, air conditioning for heaters, and space heaters, irons for ironing your clothes, etc. Those things probably will demand a bit more than that generator can provide. For example, a home's air conditioner when it's on heat mode, draws to start with a lot more than 2,000 watts. I've heard it's from 4, 5 to 7,000 watts and even more for startup, and even continuous draw of current, of power, which is current and voltage. And it can be a lot more than 2,000 watts. Of course, you cannot run those with your generator. Your generator, again, is for those days that your solar or wind system cannot run because of the conditions, or because the demand or the machinery or appliance that you need to run is basically going to run down or exhaust, deplete your battery bank very quickly, and you just don't want to do that. You want to keep enough battery charge to basically run normally throughout the day and night. If you're going to use a high demand, high consumption piece of equipment such as a shop machine, some sort of shop vacuum cleaner, or some sort of dryer, you may want to fire on that generator just for the short amount of time that you will be using those appliances, those high demand appliances. Hopefully it's going to be a very short time, ideally. That way you don't use that generator for long. Again, that is high cost, polluting, and harmful stuff that you're going to be dealing with. It is a necessary, you can say, necessary evil, to where you just use that piece of equipment. Again, high consumption, polluting, expensive, for a very, very limited and short time. I have done that before, where I have had an entire shop basically running off the grid with a generator hooked up just for those moments that I need the extra juice, as they say, the extra amount of power. And then as soon as I'm done, I shut it off. There are many ways to make generators quieter. I have gone into that in the past. Look for the chat on that, on the original or legacy Living Off the Grid series that began in 2015, ran through 2016. It's close to 30 episodes, so a few of those episodes mention this, where you can limit the amount of noise. I have done that myself by erecting or constructing barriers, sound absorbing barriers between you and the generator, such as a box lined with absorbing foam or fabric or some sort of noise absorbing material. It could be as simple as just a wall. It could be placed inside of a hole on the ground. That type of stuff limits the noise that you will be hearing while the generator is running. Of course, you want to also limit the noise that other people would hear, such as neighbors. They may complain about the noise. Hardly anyone wants to live around a bunch of noise. So you do want to limit the noise as much as possible. Look for details on how to do just that, especially constructing a box. Remember that generators also need to be ventilated. They need air, not only for cooling, but also for the internal combustion engine to keep running. It does need oxygen and air. It does intake that for the combustion to take place. So you don't want to cover the generator completely with a soundproof box, because it will just overheat, burn up. It will just shut off because it doesn't have any air to continue combustion with. And that applies to generators that run on any fossil fuel, whether it be propane, natural gas, whether gasoline or diesel. They all run with air as well as the fuel itself. So consider that, and that is all I'm going to develop on generators. Again, I have a whole show that develops on them quite a bit. And again, they are part of a hybrid systems. There are many connections that you have to perform to make it a hybrid system that works with your solar. You can get quite organized and developed, advanced, intricate when it comes to working or constructing a hybrid system to where it can work automatically. You can switch back and forth when there is no charge in your battery automatically, automatic transfer switches or one switch, or you can have it done manually. I have installed the system that you can switch between the solar and the utility power. It was a hybrid utility power solar system where it can switch the home's power from your utility or your solar, and it was a manual switch where you had to physically switch it from one system to the other. But it can also be automatic. They do have automatic switches, a lot more intricate and expensive, but they are out there. Also, hybrid systems use battery banks. Not only hybrid systems, but also alternative energy systems or off-grid renewable energy systems, such as those that work with solar panels or wind turbines, or both hybrid wind and solar systems. They use batteries. They call it battery banks. Battery banks is nothing but a collection of batteries that are connected together to work as one battery. That is the point. That is the goal, to connect the batteries so that it works as one A collection of batteries is going to have only one positive and one negative when connected correctly. And that one positive and that one negative will be connected to your power load, which is usually going to be an inverter. The inverter is going to draw power or current from your battery bank, so it can then transform it to usable AC power. They usually have outlets where you can plug in stuff or have a cable that connects directly to your home's electrical panel. The inverter is the load for the batteries, and the electrical equipment that you run from the inverter are the loads for the inverter. So it's more like a chain arrangement there with loads and power sources. The power sources, of course, being both the battery and the solar array or the wind turbine. You may think of it as the power source, the battery bank itself. You may think of it as the power source, and that power source gets its energy from another source, which is your solar array or your wind turbine. And it can also be your gas generator. Your gas generator may provide charge for a battery bank. That is actually more, not only convenient, but also more reliable than running power directly just from a generator, drawing power directly from the generator on your engine generator. A lot of engines, of course, are not perfect. They don't run perfectly. None of them do. And there are going to be variations in the speed and power it's providing. And that may translate, not so much, but it may translate a bit to the generator itself. Power coming out of that generator may fluctuate, especially if it's a very small generator, as I've had experience with, and perhaps not so reliable. And also the load that you put on that generator is going to change that output. It's going to make that output change just slightly, and it's going to be fluctuating. So running your loads from the battery bank instead, I believe it to be a bit more convenient and better, but it's not always an option. Of course, if you don't have a battery bank, you have to run your loads straight from your generator. However, you cannot run loads straight from solar panels or a wind turbine, because those things are strictly made to run through a power source, which is a battery bank. That's what they're designed to do, to charge a battery system. And I will pick up battery banks in the next episode. Thank you very much. So to continue with my chat about battery banks, there are many types of batteries that you can have for your battery bank. The most effective ones, the ones that last longest, that have least maintenance, and the more powerful ones are the lithium-based batteries. They have lithium-ion batteries and also lithium phosphate batteries now. There may be others, but those two are quite reliable. They are increasingly affordable, and they do have an energy density that's quite high, meaning that you can use it for a variety of applications. They can be discharged quite a bit and not suffer any ill effects, and they are widely available. They come in many voltages. Most popular probably is the 12-volt battery, and that is because traditionally vehicles work on 12-volt batteries for their electrical system, so that has been passed down for many decades now, and that is probably among the most, but far from the only voltage that's available out there. They do have 24-volt batteries, 48-volt batteries, and also smaller batteries that can be more easily managed, moved around, or maintained. Talking about your 6-volt batteries. They may have smaller batteries, but 6-volt batteries are probably the next most popular choice for batteries, only because they can be moved around a lot easier than a 12-volt battery. They're smaller and could be swapped out, changed out a lot easier. They're not as heavy, and that is the main purpose for those, because they are usually wired in a way that make a 12-volt system. You can wire batteries in different ways depending what voltage you want out of them. In a battery bank, for example, if you want a 24-volt system and you only have two 12-volt batteries, you can wire them in a way in series to get 24 volts out of those two batteries. Basically, the two batteries, you put them together, you wire or connect the one positive pole in one battery and one negative pole in the other battery, connect those together, and the two remaining poles on each battery, which should be one positive and one negative at each battery, those are your poles that go to your load of that one battery bank. That's now a 24-volt battery bank with two 12-volt batteries. You can do the same with 6-volt batteries to make 12-volt battery bank. You can have 4 6-volt batteries and make it into a 24 battery bank. You can have 4 12-volt batteries and make them into a 48 battery bank. by connecting them in a similar fashion as I just explained. They do get a bit complicated, so do look at wiring diagrams for battery banks depending what you want out of your battery bank. Again, voltage is one metric that you may want to deal with or configure, but also there's another metric called current amperage on a battery, called amperage. It is measured as amp hours, AH, which basically measures the amount of charge a battery bank may have. Each battery has an amp hour rating, that is amperes per hour, or the amperes that can be discharged in 1 hour of that battery being charged, and it's usually measured in amps per second, but it's translated on the rating as amps per hour. So if you have a, let's say, 50 amp hour battery that is 12 volts, those are two different readings, two different metrics, so make sure that you are aware of that. But they are combined in a battery. For example, a 6 volt 20 amp hour battery could be an example. A 12 volt 100 amp hour battery could be another example. A 24 volt 50 amp hour battery could be another example. So make sure you know the voltage and the amp hour of your battery to make a battery bank. Depending how you wire your battery bank also is how much amp hours you're going to get out of your battery, which is basically your discharge time, how much discharge time it will have in theory. For example, if you have two 12 volts 100 amp batteries connected together in parallel, meaning that you have both terminals, positive and negative, from one battery connected to both terminals, positive and negative, of the second battery, that is a parallel connection, then you would be adding the amp hour rating for both batteries. So you would have a 200 amp hour battery, or you would have a 200 amp hour battery bank, and the voltage would remain the same in a parallel connection. So you would have a 12 volt 200 amp hour battery bank by connecting those two 12 volt 100 amp hour batteries together in parallel. Again, there are many connection options and configurations. Do become familiar with them, especially with the one that you are planning to use. Most popular is the 12 volt 100 amp battery, which could be AGM, absorbed glass mat, that is adequate for solar applications, off-grid applications. That is a very popular battery. It's quite heavy, but it is an affordable option, a lot cheaper than your lithium-ion based battery, and it is durable. Yes, it is lead acid based, but it is a lot more durable than your regular lead acid car battery, or even your trolling or marine type battery, or deep cycle type battery. The AGM type battery is quite adequate, I would think, because I do have a battery bank that's been running for years, and it is very reliable. It does take quite a bit of beating as far as charge and discharge cycles, and temperature oscillations have also been quite severe, and it is still running about 4 years into service. So quite a reliable battery, depending on the manufacturer, of course. I have a set of Wise batteries, WEIZE. Those are quite reliable, but there are many other brands. Trojan are pretty popular as far as durability and reliability. Of course, there are many other brands of batteries out there throughout. So look for that, look for the specs, look for the connection configurations, etc. That information is widely available online. Make sure you go by a trusted source. There are many sources out there. Most of them I've ran into, they're pretty good. They seem to know what they're talking about. So it's quite safe to check online for connection options and all of that good stuff for batteries and battery banks. Do look at the chats and conversations and videos and shows I have on that. I've covered batteries quite extensively, including battery banks and how they work exactly, how to wire them, especially on the Living Off the Grid Legacy show series. There are a few episodes that are dedicated to battery use, battery maintenance, battery connection, etc. And also the types of batteries. But in general, you want to go with lithium-ion based batteries if you can at all. If not, your second choice should be AGM type batteries. To keep discussing some of the technologies and the strategies for being off the grid. And again, these discussions are condensed, they are brief, and they are introductory. They are meant to give you ideas, meant to give you a few options. Not all the options, but perhaps the most feasible, the most useful, options, but there may be many other options, of course, for just about every topic I speak of. And also I have developed on many of these topics on earlier chats, earlier shows, so I don't find it necessary to go into so much depth into some of the options, some of the topics discussed here, since I have done that elsewhere. And when I have, I will mention that, as I've done here in the last few chats. And to move on to telecommunications, the options that there are for off-grid for telecommunications. There are many free options, low-cost options. There are some that do have some cost to it, some initial investment, initial purchases, cost for that. But all of these options don't require any kind of subscription to a monthly service, to a service that is paid monthly or on any kind of regular basis, any kind of contract. Those are not required for the options that I'm going to mention. And again, this is for telecommunications, meaning communicating with people remotely, away from you, far, whether it's the next home over, the next house over, your neighbor, or someone that is many, many miles or kilometers away, perhaps in other cities, towns, counties, or even other states and nations. The next few options I'm going to discuss are completely free, no payment, no kind of investment or large investment is necessary. If you have, let's say, a phone without any service connection, smartphone as most of them are now, you may keep that phone and use it to communicate even without a service provider. How can you possibly do that, you may ask? Well, phones don't really need a cell phone provider to work. A lot of them are, or most of them that I know of, are basically small computers that also duplicate or act as a phone sometimes. And these smart devices, as they call them, can connect to Wi-Fi, to other networks that are open, or even networks that are closed or secured with passwords. As long as you know the password to that network, you may enter. You can go to free open networks such as Wi-Fi networks, hotspots as they call them, and freely sign on, sign in, and use that network, whether it's at a restaurant, hotel, any kind of business that has an open Wi-Fi. You can log into it and use it. Of course, it is not private. It is not by any means something that you can use in privacy. You should consider, you need to consider that everything you do, visit, websites you visit, all of the transactions you do is being recorded on that network, on that provider, the modem, the router that handles that network is being recorded. Every website is being tracked, is being logged, each and every website that you visit. So bank website visits to your bank account, your portal to your bank, your logins, all of that stuff is being recorded. So if you want that stuff to stay private, you may not want to use those networks. There are other things you can do to remain a bit more private, but in general, for most of us that are not IT professionals, are not hackers or anything like that, you won't be private if you log into those networks. So just keep that in mind. If you don't mind and you don't care about not being completely private, go ahead and use it, as long as you, of course, guard your private information. So that cell phone that is not connected to a service provider, you may use it. You may use it at a family's home that has Wi-Fi free of charge. You may use it at a friend's home that they may provide you with their Wi-Fi. A lot of people have Wi-Fi at home through their service provider. The same again with businesses, with many institutions such as schools, hospitals, malls, airports. Sometimes there are open Wi-Fi spots in cities, as far as public, out in the streets, out in public areas, in areas where people gather, where people perhaps wait for the bus. I mean, if you live in an advanced society, that's an advantage that you have a lot of Wi-Fi areas that you can log into without payment. That's option one. You may also have free service by applying for a program called Lifeline here in the U.S. and it's an FCC, Federal Communications Commission, I believe it is. And they, through that federal agency, they provide that service. And it is not necessarily through them exactly, but I believe that's where the funds come from. But the private companies, AT&T, Cox Internet, Verizon, T-Mobile, All of those cell phone companies, phone companies, and internet providers or ISPs, they have the programs that you can ask and sign up directly with them, but free of charge. They even provide sometimes smartphones. They're not going to be the top of the line, expensive, latest and greatest, fastest, most capable phones, of course, but they will be smartphones. I know myself of people that have them, and they freely use them, free of charge. No problem. They make calls. It has all of the features that most phones have, most smart devices. So that's another free option you may want to consider. Another free option for telecommunications is a bit more complicated, a bit more time consuming, but more exhilarating and exciting to me and to many others around the world. It is a very exciting and sensational world to enter and to be part of, and it's full of many people that are willing to help, many people that are very friendly and tech driven by the knowledge for technology, for advancement, for electronics, computers, tech savvy, or those that want to learn and be tech savvy. That's the world of radio communications, radio frequency communication. There are many areas for that world. It's an entire industry dedicated to it, an entire part of the population that is into it. I came to be part of it a few years ago, not too long, about 4 or 5 years now, and it is exciting and very exhilarating again, and there's lots to learn, lots to share, lots of opportunities to expand, to get rights. You do get rights with especially a part of that world which is called amateur radio. A lot of people call it ham radio, and it is basically, here in the US, it varies by nation. It is regulated by the FCC, which is a government entity, and the operation is completely free of charge. No charge for it. It is wireless. It is completely over the air. That's why it has to be controlled or managed by an entity, and it happens to be an organization from the government called the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. There are many branches. That's one of them, ham radio or amateur radio. There are others. There's another one that is completely free. It's called Citizens Band or CB radio. See, radio frequency is basically a spectrum, more like the light spectrum, etc. Radio frequency is a electromagnetic spectrum that can be used. It's all around us. It's in the air, and it's broken into frequencies. And those frequencies are further broken into categories. There's the amateur radio frequencies. That's broken into several categories for amateur radio operators. One of them is the technician band, and those have several bands also within them, which are frequencies, basically broken down in ranges of frequencies. And basically you can dial those with your radio, and as long as someone else matches that frequency somewhere else with another radio, those two radios can communicate, or the people that operate them can communicate freely. Of course, it's not private, it's over the air. It is a communication that can be picked up readily. There are other types of communications that are more private, encoded, that are encrypted. So you can go into it pretty far and get quite advanced with it. You can get quite intricate, high tech. You can get into the computer side of it. They even have frequencies for television, for FM radio, for AM radio. They have VHF, very high frequencies. They have HF, high frequencies. They have UHF, ultra high frequencies. It's a world on its own. I'm telling you, it's something that is very interesting. I have just scratched the surface with the amount of work that I've done with it. I am a licensed technician for radio operation in the amateur radio bands, and for that you need to do a little bit of training, and it's usually basic stuff, and also have a little knowledge about the operation of radios, how it works, the equipment it uses, the antennas it uses, how the signals are distributed through the air and captured and decoded, some of the equipment, how they work. So it's very interesting. You can get to build a lot of stuff, modify a lot of stuff. You can get to test a lot of equipment, maybe equipment that it's out there built from manufacturers, or equipment that you put together yourself, especially antennas, different configurations, different connections, different types of antennas, depending on your purpose of how far you want to communicate, where you want to communicate, what time of the year. Seasons do matter during communications. It's a whole array of knowledge and information that you can gather, get good at, get used to be able to use radio equipment. Of course, you have to do a relatively small investment and get a radio somehow. I mean, you may get lucky or be fortunate to be given one, to be gifted one, or to trade some other equipment for a radio. And you could begin your explorations, I would say, into the world of radio communications. Believe me, it is something quite large. It is something I didn't know existed, and the excitement in it is contagious. It is something that spreads around, and it can grow on you very quickly. If you're the type, even if you're not, I believe you could get pretty excited about it and learn and become even good and great at it. Share with others, teach others, encourage others to get in it. And it's like everything. The more people you get in it, the more people you have to communicate with. So friends and family, if they get their own radio, it could be a small radio, like a small handheld radio that is as cheap as maybe $25 to $30. I mean, try to find a cell phone for $30 and you'll have probably a hard time finding one. But a amateur radio, you can find it for about $25 these days. And they are okay quality. Of course, they're not cell phones. You cannot just dial a cell phone number through your radio, although there are claims, credible claims that you can in some instances. But for the most part, they're designed to call from radio to radio. Just so you know, cell phones are just a glorified or very fancy type of radio. They work with radio frequencies. They're just fancy and digital, and they have a screen, touch screen, and all of that. But especially the older style cell phones, they were fancier radios. That's where cell phones come from. They use basically frequencies just like radios do to communicate through the air. There's no different type of technology, magic, or anything. Even the internet that cell phones have is transmitted through radio frequencies. That's why you have to have a tower nearby so you can communicate with a cell phone. Without a tower, a cell phone is useless. If you get away too far from any tower, a cell phone is useless. There are more and more towers throughout the nation, much more than before. There are more towers this month than there were last month. And they keep popping up depending on how many people get cell phones. And there's a lot of people. People are getting cell phones at an ever younger age. Back when I was growing up, cell phones were non-existent. Then when I was in my early 20s, cell phones were coming along in the 2000s. And not too many people had them. Of course, working people, young adults had them. Older people had them because they can work and usually have an income enough to afford the expensive cell phone monthly fees that they charged. They're not much better today, but they are more affordable, and the popularity has made it that way. The economies of scale have allowed cell phones to become a bit more affordable. There's more choice. Of course, there are many cell phone companies that abuse you, and they have extremely expensive service. But for the most part, there are a lot of choices that make it more affordable. However, you can speak for free, completely free, no kind of monthly charges, no kind of fees, or sign contracts with any kind of cell phone company, and talk through radio. It doesn't have to be a base radio like they call them. They have two types, handheld and base. The handheld, of course, is the one you can carry around. They do have an antenna. They have different types. Stubby antenna is basically one that's the shorter type of antenna. They have ones with micro antennas also that are smaller, but they don't reach as far as reaching another radio. So generally, the longer the antenna, the more reach it has. That's one factor. The other factor is the power of the radio, how much watts it can send a signal with, how many watts it can send a signal with. So a handheld radio is not going to have as much power as a base radio. A base radio is usually connected to a power supply, which is connected to a wall outlet, which can deliver a lot more power, a lot more watts to communicate with. And a handheld radio doesn't have that, so it's a lot less power. However, you can take it along with you, get on a higher spot, which is another factor on communication. Higher ground, you can cover more distance because the line of sight increases as you go up. And that is another factor, line of sight. Radio waves travel in a straight line of sight. They don't travel in a straight line. They propagate more or less as a sphere or a series of spheres. But that sphere reaches further when you have a direct line of sight, basically a straight line. Theoretically, you can see your target where you're trying to reach with that radio signal. Of course, you may not be able to see because of air density, because of particles in the air, dust, your vision, a bunch of factors. But if you were to shoot a laser, for example, lasers travel straight in a straight line. So if you were to shoot a laser or aim a laser straight to a target, you can go as far as you can with that target. And as long as there's nothing in between the target and the laser is going to reach that target in theory. I say in theory because even for a laser beam, there's always particles that deflect that light, such as even air, dust, water, or humidity in the air, which is basically water vapor. All of that stuff deflects light. Therefore, the laser beam is going to scatter and eventually fade. And that's the same idea for radio waves. You need that line of sight, straight line of sight, but it does go a long distance. For example, you can communicate with a radio to the ISS, the International Space Station, because it's overhead, straight line of sight, even though it's a couple of 100 miles up above where you would be standing on Earth. Many people do communicate with the ISS via radio. It is something that is free of charge, and of course it is a hobby. It's taken more like a hobby, but you can routinely communicate with your grandma, aunt, brother-in-law, sister-in-law, cousin, mother, brother, if both of y'all have a radio. That is free communication at its best. Doesn't come more free than that. So check it out. Check out radio. Check out the many options that a lot of people have. Of course, you need to get the equipment, get the license, get the test done, get to know people in it that may be licensed, whatever. Some radio do not need a license, does not need a license, such as CB radio, Citizens Band. Check it out. All you need is the radio. Citizens Band is a bit less reliable to communicate with, but it's something that a lot of people use, including truckers and truck drivers. And they use it all the time. I will pick this up on telecommunications and their options, its options, on the next show. Thanks. To pick up on my conversation, my chat about free and low-cost communication options for living off the grid, for those that are or will be off the grid. To move on to phone networks, telephone networks, of course, are going away. I'm talking about the analog type, the older style, the one that works with low voltage, that works with a twisted pair of wire that traditionally, conventionally, historically went to a phone center near town, went through several poles, phone poles, and again, these are going away. They have been going away for many years now. I would say over a couple of decades now, mainly because of the spread of cell phone technology, wireless, and also the internet. Some people do still have these phones. There is still service available, even though it's been increasingly high in cost because it's been on the decline as far as demand. That way the price keeps going up. So if you do have one of these phones, you know what I'm talking about. I had one of those phone services maybe 12 years ago now, and I thought I was one of the last few people that still had the phone service. I had it because my internet depended on a 2-wire phone line at that time. It was I believe they called it DSL, and again, those are going away as well, those internet connections, those types. But, phone service, phone technology is very old. It's over 100, probably approaching now 150 years old, that technology. It is based on sound, and yes, it does have electricity, but the electricity that it did use, it was more for the ringer. I think it was 48 volt DC that was provided to the 2 wires. But the sound itself, I believe, was propagated via just sound, just strictly sound waves through wire, using very, very old technology, such as the speaker and the microphone, which are both technologies that do not require electricity. Yes, a lot of them are electronic now, but initially, to my knowledge, they did not require electricity. I will confirm that, but that is my belief, and you may establish simple wired communication with loved ones, friends, with other people using private telephone networks. You could begin as simple as two telephones, analog telephones, connected to each other that you can just pick up without dialing any number, pick up both ends and talk freely. You can extend that wire as long as you can to the next door in your home, the next room, could be the next floor level. It can also be your neighbor, whether it be a close by neighbor next door to your home, or a further neighbor a couple of houses down, or even on the next street if you have the capability of running the wire. That is basically the main thing that you need, a wired connection. You may live out in a rural area where you can extend a wire without causing too much issues with authorities, using perhaps poles, or even by running the wire underground, of course using wire that's suitable for burial, usually called direct burial wire. And you can establish a simple two-phone telephone communication. You can extend that and connect more than two phones. You would require at that point a switchboard, what they call a switchboard, where you need to have someone pick up your call and connect your phone's cables, wires, the pair of cables or wires, connect them to the number that you want to talk to, communicate with, to the phone that you want to communicate with. Let's say there's a 3-phone network, and this is as simple as it gets. A 3-phone network. You have a telephone on one end wired to the switchboard, which is, let's say, in the center, and that switchboard could either connect your phone, let's say you're the main person, connect your phone to one of two choices, or one of two phones. It could be phone, let's say, 2 or phone 3 if you were to be phone 1. And that person would have to manually switch the wires from wherever they were located before to the correct phone that you want to reach. And that basically was how it worked for many years. Telephones did work this way for many years, where you have a switchboard, basically a lot more intricate, of course, with just plugs, connections. And there used to be people, traditionally women, that were their job was to switch phone plugs, connections from one place to the other, depending where the connection was needed. Of course, this is a lot more complicated when you have many phones, but this is how it was. And then after that, it switched to automatic switchboards, of course, that were electronic at first, then computerized, and that's how it remains today. When you call a long distance number, it goes through a series of computers, which eventually switch your call, transfer your call to the correct channel. It could be a lot more intricate. I am not sure exactly if that is how it works, but it may be in a similar fashion as an automatic switchboard. Of course, a lot faster, a lot better, more computerized, no need for a person to make any changes. You can, of course, make a phone network totally free of charge, totally free of any kind of commitment to monthly payment or any kind of contract with a phone company. You basically are the phone company. You have a phone network, and it can be completely free. All you need is the phones, very established technology, which has been around for over 100 years. And you may be able to find these older analog phones at antique stores. I mean, you can find them even at some thrift stores, discount stores, online. There may even be some for sale in Amazon and other online stores. You may also communicate using computers. You may set up, and this is probably a lot more feasible than a analog phone network, just because computers are so available now. But you may be able to do a private network of computers. No need to be connected to any kind of internet provider. All you need is a router, PC connections such as Ethernet, and your PC, your personal computer. You need at least 2, of course, to make a PC network. You have to have at least 2 computers connected. And all you got to do is connect those 2 computers to a router. Those 2 computers, as long as they're connected to a router, they are connected to the network. As long as you have an open network, or they both have access to the network via password, username and password, you may communicate with each other, send messages, exchange files, exchange any kind of media, whether it be pictures, video, texting, chatting, even voice communication and video voice communication, audio visual, do all kinds of stuff. All you need is a webcam, microphone, and voila, you have a small internet or web. Yes, you could get a lot more intricate, just like you can with phones, with computers, with a router, with several connections. You can connect several computers. You can extend computer connection to the next room, to the next house, or to the next town over. It all depends on your capability as far as extending those lines, those connections, which would probably be Ethernet if they're not more than maybe 300 yards or 100 meters. But you can also use fiber optic lines that could be adapted in between your Ethernet connection with Ethernet to fiber adapters. They have them out there for affordable prices, and you can extend your line pretty far out. I am not going to speculate the distance you can go out, but it is kilometers, if not longer. So computer networks are another option. Before I leave the telecommunications options for off-grid, I would like to mention another type of communication that is available through radio waves, and it is Morse code. You may communicate using Morse code. Yes, you have to learn Morse code, which is very doable. It is not anywhere as difficult as learning, let's say, a language or anything like that. It's more like learning multiplication tables. And of course, each letter has its own pattern as far as sound pattern. So you have to have I believe they call it a
straight key.
A Morse code
Straight key
creates a series of tones as you tap a button with your finger. It is as simple as that. It's just a switch, usually with a button that is spring-loaded, that you can tap, and you can keep it on for longer periods or just tap it on and off. Of course, you can make different tones depending on the length of the tone, and you can break those tones into small packets or series of tones, basically making up words. You can get into that if you do get into radio. It has to be amateur radio, I believe. It is only available in amateur radio, and you can have privileges for that to communicate through Morse code with the first level of their licensing scheme, which is the technician level. A pretty straightforward test that you have to take, not too difficult. You can study for a week and be sure to pass it. After that, you can learn a lot more about it. And again, it is a very exciting field to get into, more like a hobby, but it can be something that takes a lot more time and effort than a hobby.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. Please look for the next episode soon, and please ensure to share this with your friends and family. And please like this content and subscribe as a sign of support and for me to continue to provide this type of content to more people like you. Lastly, if you wish to support this content further, please visit the links provided in this publication. Thank you.